What is going on, everybody? My name is Kneeckoh and welcome to another Pokemon video. Today I want to talk about something that I've recently really gotten addicted to, and that is competitive battling in Pokemon Go. Obviously, if you're familiar with the channel, I play a lot of competitive Scarlet and Violet, but recently I've dipped into competitive Go, especially after watching the World Championships, and I have gotten hugely addicted to it, doing a ton of research on it, and I want to help other people like myself who want to get into it learn how to do it the most effective way. So today we're going to be doing a beginner's guide to competitive Pokemon Go, and I have everything that you need to know here. So let's get into it. So first off, competitive Pokemon Go, if you look at it from the outside, and this is like a really simplified view of it, is that it's just a bunch of tapping, using some powerful attacks here and there, and shielding in order to win a 3v3 battle of Pokemon. However, it goes so much deeper than this, and I want to give you all the nitty-gritty details to get in at a beginner level. There's a lot of other higher tech things that you could do. I'm just going to talk about the most beginner basic stuff that will help you get into it most effectively here. Now, before we get into like things like typings and team buildings for competitive Pokemon Go, I think it's important to learn the absolute basics of how these battles work to then jump into typings and team building. So first off, there are three different types of main battles that you will be doing in Go Battle League. First, there is the Great Ball League, and that is the 1500 CP cap league. All Pokemon must be 1500 CP. There is Ultra 2500 cap here, CP of 2500, and then there is Masters that is no CP cap, and these cycle through on a rotation. There is a schedule in Pokemon Go that you can look at for this. There are some other formats that you could do, and these cycle on a rotation, but these are not the most consistent. Great Ball is the one that is followed for the actual World Championships and competitive scene for Pokemon Go. But now that you have that basic information on what the different battle styles are and where you may want to start throwing different Pokemon, let's talk about the actual Pokemon and the moves that they can have. So first things first, each Pokemon in the game has two attacks off the rip. They have a fast attack and they have a charge attack. However, another charge attack can be gained by spending Stardust and Candy. This varies between each different Pokemon, and by doing this you can unlock an additional charge attack, meaning that your Pokemon can have one fast attack and two charge attacks once fully powered up. Now, these fast and charge moves can be changed with fast TMs and charge TMs. However, these are changed at random. You don't get to select. However, there are elite charge and fast TMs that you can use, and these allow you to select from any of the moves the Pokemon can learn. Also allows you to select some legacy moves that are no longer available, or maybe were only available through community days. This is very useful. However, these items are much more rare. Now, in terms of what each of these is, fast attacks are what you do when you simply tap the screen, and they have a set amount of damage that you can do. It is listed right there on the screen. You can see it. So charge attacks are the opposite, where you have to charge up energy in order to use them, and you are going to be able to do the little bubble mini game. Depending on the type of move, different mini game applies, and the more bubbles you hit, the more power this move is actually going to do. And this segues very nicely into the next category, which is energy. Like I mentioned, charge attacks require energy in order to be used, and you gain energy by using your fast attacks. Fast attacks can generate a separate number of energy just depending on the particular fast attack, and the max number of energy that you can hold is 100. So whenever you see one of your charge attacks fill up all the way, that means you cannot gain any more energy. You can continue fast attacking, perhaps if a Pokemon's low on HP and you don't want to waste one of your charge attacks. You can save that, but you will not gain any more energy past level 100. Now, like I mentioned before, fast attacks give different amounts of energy, and the more energy that a fast attack does, the less damage it is likely to do, simply on balancing issues alone. So just something to note, if you're getting a lot of energy from your fast attacks, you're not going to be doing as much damage with said fast attacks, but you're going to be able to throw off more of your charge attacks. Also, some fast attacks simply take longer to use than other fast attacks, and this leads perfectly into the next very important section called turns. Now, everything in Pokemon Go takes a turn. A turn takes approximately half a second in order to take place. So it's not a second by second game, it's a half second game, which is important to note. Fast moves can range anywhere from 1 turn to 5 turns. So just times it by 0.5 and you'll get the number for 5 turns worth of a fast attack. This is something very important to note when you're slotting your fast attacks based on the amount of damage that you're doing. You want to sometimes have Pokemon that do slower attacks. Maybe the benefit is the extra damage that you might get, but maybe you want to go with something faster that can spit off a lot of attacks very quickly. It very much depends on the Pokemon that you're using. Now, when you activate a charge move, this will take 1 turn, meaning it takes half a second in order to do. So, just something to note, this is the same for swapping a Pokemon in and out, which you can do by tapping the little icon on the side of the screen. This also takes 1 turn, so it takes 0.5 seconds in order to do, which means your Pokemon can occasionally take a hit on a switch in, and can be very detrimental in certain scenarios. Now, as previously mentioned, back to charge attacks, you can have 2 charge attacks per Pokemon, the second being unlocked after spending X number of Stardust and Candy on a particular Pokemon. This is very nice because it allows you to have multiple different charge types with different types, allowing you to have more coverage. So say you have something like an Azumarill and you have one that's an ice type and one that's a fairy type. This gives you coverage into multiple different types of Pokemon with different weaknesses, giving you that much more variety in a battle. Now, with charge attacks, shields can block charge attacks, and you get 2 shields per battle, so you need to be very careful about when you're deciding to use your shield. When you use a shield, if you see a blue coloration at the end of the attack, that means it was not very effective and your Pokemon could have likely taken that hit. Then you also have the purple coloration, which means it was neutral damage and it was just going to hit you at a regular base damage. Then you have the red shield, and this means that it was a super effective attack and it was potentially a very good shield use. So this is something just to note. It's not super key information, but is nice to know information. Finally, in terms of damage types, this is determined by the actual type of the move, not the type of your Pokemon. This means that if you have an Azumarill with an Ice Beam, this is going to do ice damage. It's not going to do water or fairy damage, right? So just something to note in that regard. However, in terms of damage types, it's important to know about stab. If you use an attack that matches the typing of your Pokemon, let's say you use Hydro Pump on an Azumarill, both of those are water type, you are going to get something known as same type attack bonus. This is a little boost that you're going to get on the attack for the attack being the same type as the Pokemon type, which is very beneficial. So if you have stab on your Pokemon, say you're using either a fast or charge attack that matches the type of your Pokemon, you are going to get a 1.25 times bonus on your damage. So very, very nice. Now, the final thing to talk about as far as attacks go are buffs and debuffs that attacks can give. Now, some charge attacks can either apply an attack or defense buff to your Pokemon or lower the attack and defense of an opposing Pokemon. However, there are some attacks that also lower your own Pokemon's attack and defense, like close combat and things of that nature. These fall into 2 separate categories, stage 1 and stage 2 buffs. Stage 1 is when it says something simple like attack or defense fell or attack or defense rises. Something very, very simple. This is the stage 1. Stage 1s are going to buff or debuff by 12.5% versus stage 2, where it will say attack or defense severely dropped or rose. This is going to be by 25%. And when you stack these are going to apply to the current state. So say you've already had a 25% buff on a particular Pokemon or a 12.5% buff on a particular Pokemon. If you use another stage 1, that is going to stack on top of the already applied 12.5% buff. So it just keeps growing. However, it can only grow up to 4 times. This is for balancing reasons. They don't want you to just endlessly be able to stack buffs on a Pokemon, but this can be changed as well. If you rotate a Pokemon out, it will lose all the stat buffs or debuffs it has applied to it, much like it does in the main series Pokemon games. But that pretty much covers everything as far as the nitty-gritty details in battling. So you can go back and rewatch any of that if you need to know it. But moving on, let's start talking about typings of Pokemon. Now, if you're new to Pokemon, you're not going to have this, but if you've played Pokemon as long as I have, you have all this memorized already. It's just part of your being, right? But if you're new, all Pokemon have their own unique types, and this gives them different resistances and weaknesses based on the types that they battle into. Some Pokemon even have dual typings, allowing them to have multiple resistances or multiple weaknesses. Honestly, as far as learning these, the best way to learn type matchups is just by playing the game, doing gym battles, doing raids, doing PvP. All of this is going to help you learn the different types. There are 18 different types in Pokemon, so it can take a little bit of time, but there are things that can help outside of Pokemon as well, like apps that you can do little quizzes on, things of that nature. I personally just think playing the game is easily the best way to hop in and learn. Now, when it comes to resisting attacks, for example, a water type into a grass type, you are going to take 0.625 damage from that attack. Now, there is the double resistant Pokemon, right? So let's say you have a typing that resists a attack type twice. So let's say a Heatran and like a Flutter Mane or something, right? A fairy type into a Fire Steel. That attack is only going to do 0.39 times damage that it would regularly do. So definitely very powerful combinations based on the typing. If you double resist something, you're going to be taking significantly less damage. However, there is a third scenario you need to be aware of. In the mainline Pokemon games, there are certain types that just exclusively avoid damage altogether. Things like ground type into flying, electric into ground, or ghost into normal, things of that nature. There are instances of that in Pokemon Go. However, you cannot just avoid damage altogether in Pokemon Go. This has been nerfed. However, if it was something from the mainline games, like something an electric type attack into a ground type, you are automatically double resisted. So you automatically resist ×2 without having to have that additional typing like we mentioned before. However, this leads to a very interesting scenario where if you have an additional type and that also resists whatever type you are already double resisted to, you are going to be able to take even less damage, resulting in a triple resistance situation. And in that scenario, you are going to take 0.24 damage from those attacks. So an exact scenario of this would be something like a Torterra, that is a grass and ground type Pokemon. Grass resists electric type attacks, as does ground, but ground resisted ×2, you're going to have a triple resist scenario. Now on the flip side of this, if you are doing super effective damage and you're only doing 1 time super effective damage, you're timesing this by 1.6. Or if you find yourself in a scenario where you have a double weakness, for example, a rock fire type getting attacked by a water type, you are going to take times 2.56 damage from these double weakness attacks. Now we can finally start dipping into team building a little bit. Now I'm not going to go super in depth on the multiple different team styles that you can have here because this is just a beginner's guide, but I'm going to give you some general overall thoughts to consider when you go in and start building teams in Pokemon Go. Now, one key factor, and this applies both to Pokemon Go as well as to mainline Pokemon games, is when you build a team, you want to have Pokemon on said team that can cover each other's weaknesses. And a perfect example of this is something like a Fire, Water, Grass Core, which is my Ultra League team. I have Charizard, I have Venusaur, and I have Poliwrath. This is Fire, Water, Grass. The Fire type would cover any potential Grass type attacks into a Water type. If I swapped in Charizard and took a Grass type attack, obviously I'm not going to take as much damage. And this goes for all the other. It forms a perfect little triangle, allowing you to have perfect balance and allow you to swap into those attacks, take those hits, and be able to continue along. This is like a balanced core style team. Now, balanced cores work a bit differently in this game than they would in something like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, because there are scenarios where you can have a balanced core that does not cover in a perfect little triangle. You have something that is more neutral in there that can hop in and take some damage as well. An example of this would be something like Galarian, Stunfisk, and Altaria, which cover each other's weaknesses very well. Both, play very nicely together. You have water type weaknesses, fire type weaknesses, and ground type weaknesses on Galarian, Stunfisk, and Altaria eats all those up. And then you have ice type weaknesses, fairy type weaknesses, and Galarian, Stunfisk eats those up. In that style of team, you'd be able to have an additional Pokemon, something like a Sableye perhaps, that necessarily doesn't have any type advantage that would cover a weakness on the other two Pokemon, but is just really safe to swap in and then deal a bunch of damage in return, because this Pokemon doesn't have a lot of checks in the meta. This is something called a safe swap, and you can have balanced style teams that, like I said, don't have that perfect triangle, but are still able to formulate a nice balanced team by having those safe swap options like Sableye. Now, there are other style teams that may run 2 of the same type with 1 that covers the resistance, or Pokemon. I've even seen some mono type teams out there that have performed well with a lot of dual typing Pokemon, but I'm not, again, going into the nitty gritty of it, just some overall thoughts for you to consider. The big thing is having those types that can cover multiple different things that you're going to go up against and cover your weaknesses. Now, before you get into team building, this is very important. Before you get into team building, you want to make sure you understand how IVs work in Pokemon Go, because it's not as easy as you might think. I personally made this mistake before I started really researching anything that had to do with competitive Pokemon, where I just started boosting like my 96, 98, and 100% Pokemon all the way up, so that way I could start using them in competitive play. And this isn't always the best case scenario for particular Pokemon. Now, if you don't know how to check the stats on your Pokemon, check the IVs, which stands for individual values. You are going to be able to do this in the appraisal tool. It's based on the stars that the Pokemon has. It shows you the attack, defense, and HP of that particular Pokemon, showing you how good it is. Now, there are different scenarios where you're going to want different IV stats, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. For Great and Ultra Ball League, you are mainly going to want low attack, high HP, and high defense Pokemon. You might be wondering why in the world you would want low attack on a Pokemon, And it is for this reason. Attack in Pokemon Go leads to higher CP. It's actually ×2 CP. Now, there is a hidden stat value that is a level. Your Pokemon has levels, and this means the lower CP, the higher you can level up that Pokemon, increasing its overall stat distribution. So the lower your attack is, the less CP you have, and the more you can level up this Pokemon. The reason this is important for Great and Ultra League is because these two leagues have CP caps. So you want to be able to level up your Pokemon as much as possible before hitting that CP cap, allowing you to get the most bulk out of that particular Pokemon. The reason that you just drop the attack is because, again, it ties into that CP. If you have higher CP, that is the less you can level up that particular Pokemon before hitting that CP cap. However, this is different for Masters League. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, Masters League has no CP cap, meaning that you want like hundos and perfect Pokemon for Masters League because you want all of those stats because there is no cap. Max them out and go to town. Now, as far as checking IVs goes, you can do this in game, but it's not very intuitive. There is a separate app that I really like using called PokeGenie, where you could take a screenshot of your Pokemon in the appraisal tool and then be able to import that into PokeGenie and see exactly what you need. As far as IV goes, PokeGenie will break down what the best league is for that particular Pokemon, as well as how good their stats are for that particular league in the app. It's very, very useful for seeing what is good and what isn't as far as Pokemon Go PvP, and I highly recommend you download it. The final thing that I think is worth understanding is the meta. Now, the meta is something that at the start really doesn't matter as much. It's something that you can kind of ignore if you're just getting in and just kind of want to play very casually in Pokemon Go. You could just start getting wins with really creative teams as long as you know that you follow the type weaknesses and the covering each other. You could get away with a lot at the early ranks. However, as you play, you'll start seeing more and more of the same Pokemon start popping up. Things like Sableye, Azumarill, Bastiodon, all that stuff is going to start popping up a lot more, and that's because those Pokemon have a tendency to be the best at what they do. Things like Noctowl, Altaria, you know, Greninja's starting to pop up now that we've had the community day. There's a lot of Pokemon that you're going to see a lot on rotation, and it's because they are just so good. Now, meta shifts happen. It's not like you're going to see all of these Pokemon constantly and forever and always. Meta shifts do happen based on, you know, new Pokemon being added to the game that counter previous Pokemon. For example, like I said, Greninja is very popular right now because it got access to a new move on community day, allowing it to be very, very threatening in the format. But this constantly changes. New moves are added, new moves are, you know, taken away, new Pokemon are added. So this is constantly going to be shaping and adapting over time. And the best way that you can learn what the meta is by, one, playing the game and seeing what constantly pops up and what's working, but also checking out websites like PvPoke. That's very, very useful. That website shows all the rankings of different leagues and what Pokemon are good with what movesets on percentage wise, you know, their success rates, things like that. Highly recommend checking out a lot of those different websites. There's a ton like it. That's just the one I always hop to and take a look at. Also checking out other content creators that cover PvP IVs. For example, like Pokedaxi for all the community days. We'll talk about the IVs that are good for a particular Pokemon. So things of that nature are really, really useful as far as learning what the meta is, as well as, you know, the IVs of particular Pokemon. So that way you know what you need to be looking for moving forward. But that pretty much wraps up everything I feel that you need to know in order to get into competitive Pokemon. Obviously, there are a lot of other scenarios and other strategies that you can use to maximize the effectiveness of your battles, but I just wanted to show you how you could get in and start getting some wins and start earning some of those rewards in competitive Pokemon Go. But that is going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. I will have periodically more Pokemon Go stuff popping up. I've just been playing it a ton. It's really, really fun right now. So be sure to sub for more Pokemon stuff in general from me in the future. Also be sure to check out the Discord. People over there hanging out playing Pokemon Go all the time. And if you want to see anything else from me, check out any of these videos that you see here on screen. But until next time, peace.